The entire restaurant seemed to disappear for Ethan Brooks the moment his 7-year-old daughter looked across the table at a woman she had known for barely an hour and asked, "Can you be my mom?" Ethan's hand stopped halfway to his glass. The woman sitting opposite them, CEO Caroline Mercer, froze too. She was one of the most successful executives in the city, a woman who could control a boardroom with a single look, yet now she sat speechless in front of a little girl with hopeful eyes. Ethan wanted to apologize, to explain, to pull the moment back before it became something painful. But then he noticed Caroline's expression. She was not offended. She looked as though one innocent question had touched a place inside her that had been empty for years. If you believe kindness still matters and that people deserve second chances when life has left them lonely or afraid, please like this video, leave a comment, share this story with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to Dad's Hope. Your support helps stories like this reach people who may need to remember that sometimes the family we need enters our lives in unexpected ways. Ethan was 37 years old and had been raising his daughter, Sophie, alone since his wife died 4 years earlier. He worked as a building maintenance supervisor in a large corporate complex downtown, a job that paid enough to keep their small apartment and give Sophie what she needed, but not much more. Their life was simple. School mornings were rushed. Dinner was usually something Ethan could cook in less than 30 minutes. Saturdays were for laundry, grocery shopping, and whatever free adventure Sophie could convince him to take. Ethan had learned how to tie ponytails badly, remember school projects at the last minute, and hide his exhaustion when Sophie needed him to be cheerful. He had also learned how to avoid thinking about the future. Friends occasionally suggested he start dating again. Ethan always found a reason not to. He told himself he was too busy. Sophie needed stability. Work demanded too much. But the truth was more complicated. Loving someone once had given him the happiest years of his life. Losing her had taught him how quickly happiness could disappear. Caroline Mercer understood loneliness for entirely different reasons. At 42, she was the CEO of Mercer Development, a company that owned commercial properties across several states. Her photograph appeared in business magazines. She lived in a penthouse overlooking the river. She attended dinners where people waited months for invitations. Yet most nights she ate alone. Caroline had spent nearly 2 decades building her company. Relationships ended because work always came first. Friendships slowly became networking connections. Her parents lived overseas, and her younger brother had a family of his own several hours away. People surrounded Caroline every day. Almost no one truly knew her. She first met Ethan on a Tuesday evening when an electrical failure shut down part of Mercer Development's headquarters. Ethan was called to the executive floor. Caroline was still in her office when he arrived. Most employees became nervous around her. Ethan did not. He was respectful, efficient, and focused entirely on fixing the problem. While he worked, Caroline noticed a small handmade bracelet around his wrist. It was bright purple and covered with uneven plastic beads. It looked ridiculous against his work uniform. Caroline asked about it. Ethan smiled and explained that his daughter had made it and informed him he was required to wear it forever. Caroline laughed. It surprised both of them. The repair took an hour. By the time Ethan left, Caroline knew his daughter's name, that Sophie loved pancakes, and that Ethan had once burned an entire birthday cake because he forgot to remove the cardboard base. She found herself thinking about the conversation afterward. A few weeks later, Caroline encountered Ethan again in the lobby. This time Sophie was with him. Her after-school program had closed unexpectedly, and Ethan was finishing paperwork before they went home. Sophie introduced herself with complete confidence. Within minutes, she was explaining to Caroline that her father could repair almost anything except dolls because he always made their hair worse. Caroline laughed again. Sophie liked her immediately. After that, small encounters became familiar. Sometimes Caroline passed Ethan and Sophie near the lobby. Sometimes Sophie drew pictures while Ethan finished work. Caroline began stopping for a few minutes. She learned that Sophie loved animals, hated peas, and believed every adult should own at least one stuffed dinosaur. Sophie learned that Caroline worked on the top floor, drank too much coffee, and did not know how to make pancakes. That final detail deeply concerned her. The dinner happened almost by accident. Mercer Development had completed a major renovation project, and Caroline invited several employees and their families to a small celebration at a restaurant nearby. Ethan nearly declined. Sophie insisted. By the time they arrived, the event was already crowded. Through a strange sequence of seating changes, Ethan and Sophie ended up at Caroline's table. For the first time, Ethan saw Caroline outside the office. She seemed different. Softer. She asked Sophie about school and actually listened to the answer. She laughed when Sophie complained about multiplication. She even admitted she had once failed a spelling test because she could not spell necessary. Sophie stared at her as though this revelation proved CEOs were human. Ethan found himself relaxing. Then Sophie asked about Caroline's family. Caroline explained that she lived alone. Sophie looked confused. She asked whether Caroline had children. Caroline said no. A few moments later, Sophie looked at her father, then back at Caroline. And asked the question. "Can you be my mom?" Ethan froze. The nearby conversation seemed suddenly too loud and too quiet at the same time. He immediately apologized. He explained that Sophie missed her mother and sometimes said things before thinking. Sophie looked down. Caroline saw the embarrassment on Ethan's face and the disappointment on Sophie's. She could have laughed it off. Instead, she answered carefully. She told Sophie that becoming someone's mother was a very big thing, and that people could not simply decide it during dinner. But she also said she was honored Sophie had asked. Sophie smiled again. Ethan did not know what to say. On the drive home, he gently explained to Sophie why the question had been too personal. Sophie listened. Then she said something that stayed with him. She said Caroline looked lonely. Ethan had noticed it too. He simply had not wanted to admit it. The dinner changed something between Ethan and Caroline. Neither of them rushed it. Caroline did not suddenly become part of their family. Ethan did not mistake one emotional moment for destiny. Instead, they became friends. Caroline occasionally joined them for coffee. Sophie invited her to a school art show. Ethan helped Caroline assemble a bookshelf in her apartment after she admitted she had been staring at the unopened box for 3 months. They began spending time together in ordinary ways. That was what made it matter. Caroline learned what life with a child actually looked like. Crumbs in the car. Forgotten homework. Cartoons too early on Saturday mornings. Questions asked at the worst possible moment. She loved it more than she expected. Ethan learned that Caroline was not simply powerful and successful. She was funny when she forgot to be formal. She loved old movies. She called her mother every Sunday. She was terrified of being needed because she feared disappointing people. Months passed. Ethan began to feel something he had spent years avoiding. Hope. That frightened him. One evening, after Sophie had fallen asleep on the couch during a movie, Ethan finally told Caroline why he had resisted letting anyone get close. He said losing his wife had nearly broken him. He could survive losing someone again. What he did not know was whether Sophie could. Caroline understood. She did not promise nothing bad would ever happen. She did not make impossible guarantees. She simply told him she would never ask him to move faster than he was ready. That answer mattered more than a promise. A year after the restaurant dinner, Sophie had a school assignment about family. She drew 3 people. Ethan. Herself. Caroline. She did not label Caroline Mom. She wrote, Caroline. When Caroline saw it, she cried. Not because she wanted a title. Because she finally understood that belonging did not always begin with a name. Sometimes it began with showing up. Caroline continued leading her company, but she changed how she lived. She protected evenings that once belonged entirely to work. Ethan accepted that loving someone new did not erase the person he had lost. Sophie learned that missing her mother and loving Caroline could exist in the same heart. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who believes people can find love and family after loss, and subscribe to Dad's Hope. Sometimes healing does not mean replacing what was lost. It means allowing something new to grow beside the memory. Before we end, please comment, love can find us again, if you believe life can still bring connection after heartbreak. Years later, Ethan would still remember the exact expression on Caroline's face when Sophie asked that impossible question in the restaurant. At the time, he thought it was the most embarrassing moment of his life. Caroline remembered it differently. She said it was the first time anyone had looked at her and imagined she might belong somewhere beyond an office or a company title. Sophie remembered almost none of the awkwardness. To her, the question had been simple. She saw a lonely woman, a lonely father, and two people who made each other smile. Children sometimes see possibilities adults are too frightened to consider. Sophie had asked Caroline to become her mother long before any of them were ready for that word. But what she had really asked was whether Caroline wanted to stop being alone. And eventually, all three of them discovered the answer together.